I'm Thomas Mills from Politics NC. Welcome to the Restless Natives podcast. And today, once again, we have Travis Fain and Anderson Clayton, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of North Carolina politics a little bit. So I'm going to jump right in. Anderson, last night you were at a town hall. I don't know if it was yours per se, Pahaw, North Carolina, because Richard Hudson apparently won't have town halls. Hudson's the Republican congressman from that district. Can you tell me a little bit about why you did it and who organized it, why you did it, and what kind of response did you get?
Yeah, we had a really great opportunity to partner with the DNC, the DCCC, and the DSCC to be able to bring Representative Maxwell Frost and Senator Chris Murphy to North Carolina for honestly, sort of a world tour is what I'm calling it, but they're going across the country to red and rural districts to show up where Republicans haven't, but also where Democrats, quite frankly, haven't in a really long time, to be able to show up, answer questions, meet constituents where they're at right now. And the reason why we started it in North Carolina in NC09 is because Richard Hudson is also the Republican member of Congress that told every other Republican member of Congress it might be a bad idea to do these town halls once they started seeing how many angry people were showing up to them concerned about Social Security cuts and potential cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. And it was a lot of the older folks coming out to these events that we know consistently show up to the polls every election cycle. And I think that one thing that Republicans are nervous about right now is the type of people that are coming to these events, because it's not your typical crowd of folks that I think are normally willing to wait in long lines and stand in a rally sort of setting like we did last night, because Haw River Ballroom in Saxe-Pahaw is a rural part of North Carolina, and so the venue itself was standing room only, and we did have people standing in there for about 3 hours listening to representatives answer their questions.
Great. Travis, what did you think? These have been going on some, and around the country. You see them periodically, and they seem to be getting a good response. I mean, what is your thought about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of have two minds here. When I saw Congressman Richard Hudson tell or coverage that he had told other Republicans not to hold town halls, I thought, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't do that because you're just going to get yelled at. I don't know that it wasn't great that he did it in a way that immediately leaked, but that would have been my counsel as well. And I think it's great that Democrats are doing town halls instead. I mean, this is an opportunity to be heard. I am interested in hearing from you, Anderson. One of the things I always think about communication is it needs to have a goal. And so what is the goal? Like, are y'all trying to produce energy? Are you trying to produce coverage and highlight the fact that Republicans aren't listening to people? Or are you getting ideas from people who maybe haven't been listened to and feel unheard? Like what comes the day after and the week after, and as these town halls go forward?
All of the above. And I think that, number one, the case that I made to people last night was that we are still in a fight for our Supreme Court race that's going on right now, too. And so giving them an update on that, it was educational for a lot of folks. You got to hear from a local school board representative in Alamance County, Seneca Rogers, and making sure that people know when our school board meetings are in Alamance and how you can get involved there. And it was cool because 97% of the people that came to the town hall were from Richard Hudson's district. It wasn't like you had a lot of people that were shipped in from Wake County or something like that. And I think that that's typically what a lot of folks tend to know. And we also did not have data or information for about 400 of the people that came that night. And so I think it's also telling to us to see like what types of folks are willing to show up to events like this that they may not have politically gotten involved with before. Like someone that comes to a town hall may not come to a canvas launch immediately, but it's how do we have the ladder of escalation to be able to get people and to say, oh, I can be more involved with this. And I think it's letting them know. And so an educational component to it. We're going to follow up with everybody and invite them to the Zoom call that we're doing tonight, actually, this Friday night, about the Supreme Court race with Justice Riggs, and trying to get them to take another action step afterwards. Because to your point, I don't think that it's worth doing a protest or a town hall or rally or anything if you're not going to have the sort of follow-up that you need to with those folks afterwards to give them the next step of how they get involved.
That's great. One of my complaints about, or not complaints, but one of the things I watched with the Moral Monday protests, which were pretty, they were dynamic, exciting. They caught a lot of attention. but I never felt like they captured a lot of data. There was no follow-up. You know, it was like, come to the rallies, but somebody should have been there somehow. I mean, you had thousands of people in Raleigh every week. Somebody should have been collecting, you know, information to do exactly what you're talking. Now, it's amazing that, you know, 10 years ago when those were happening, that we didn't have the technology that we have today to bring people onto Zoom calls. It would have had to have been some sort of, you know, conference call. But I think that's
in person,
crucial.
right? Like
In person, yeah.
technology's given us a lot of abilities to be able to organize in different ways, and I think that you've either seen people run towards that or run away from it, quite frankly. And I think that our party is trying to do a little bit of both, and we're trying to say you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right. Travis, one thing, a point that you made about you said you would recommend they don't show up at the town halls either. One thing that Adam Kinzinger said when Kinzinger came out of the Tea Party movement, that's what got him motivated, and it started the same way. It started at town hall meetings, but back then, a lot of them were Republican members of Congress getting yelled at by activist members of the Republican Party. And he said that what happened was their first response was to stop having the town halls. And when they stopped having the town halls, it just angered the people and made the protests grow faster. The Tea Party protests, it actually gave them fuel because they stopped showing up to the town halls. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think there's a little bit of that. It's like, if people feel like their elected officials are scared of them, that doesn't make people feel empowered. That makes people angry.
Yeah, and I mean, angry in April of 2025 only gets you so far. Angry in October and November of 2026, now you're talking.
Right.
But it's going to be, you know, almost a different country by then. Right. We have no idea how these things are going to play out. And I mean, ultimately, the economy will decide the next round of elections. And we got a long way to go before we really see what's going to happen there. I mean, we could be into a recession and then back out of it by then. I don't know. So it's all a matter of what you're building toward and what you're trying to accomplish. But, I mean, look, I'm an old reporter. Anytime elected officials won't show up and answer people's legitimate questions, I think that's wrong.
Right.
I mean, I also think the part of what you said earlier, Travis, about like you're trying to use this to elevate stories too. Like one of the things that we heard so much last night was like small businesses were not getting enough coverage in what's happening right now. People keep talking about tariffs and the stories not being told enough about people are already, you know, holding their pocketbooks close. They're already fearful about what's going to happen because of how people are talking about what's going on right now nationally too. And I think like utilizing that bully pulpit is something that and honestly, Senator Murphy said it last night, which I thought was cool. He said, you know, we are the opposition party and right now our power is the people. Like it is going out and doing things like this. It is being able to bring crowds together and to be able to utilize the masses. And I was sort of like, it is a good way to look at it. Is like your job's actually not to be in DC at this moment in time. It's to be out talking to folks about what's happening there and how it's going to affect them.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, though, for voters, too, is that this was the plan. Like, this is what Trump ran on, doing what he is doing right now. And so I'm always eager for people to connect the dots on, hey, this person said that thing, and then I voted for that thing, and then that thing happened to me. That's all the same thing. It didn't change. You're going to know people who get deported, or you're going to know people who get deported. You're going to be hurt by a recession as the president tries to essentially remake our economy. I saw a story the other day. Is it that Trump's Treasury Secretary is saying that they're looking for kind of a reset of our economy and China's, and China's would be more consumer driven and ours would become more manufacturing driven. What I read into that was, well, we can make stuff and send it to China. I don't want that. That's not what I'm looking for in our economy. Even though I do think some types of manufacturing are good for the economy, and frankly, we're already growing because of, I think, the poorly named Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't reduce inflation, but did do a lot of really good things, particularly in North Carolina when it comes to battery production, electric vehicle production. We're kind of remaking the backbone of our economy here, in part on that bill and the CHIPS Act, which Trump is also coming after.
Right. I want to switch gears a little bit. I do want to come back to the economy, but before we get too far in here, I want to get an update on what's going on with the Jefferson Griffin, Allison Riggs race, because it feels like that right now the momentum has kind of shifted in Riggs's favor, with the court coming out with pausing the count. Anderson, can you update us? Can you tell us a little bit what's happening with that?
Yeah, right now, federal courts came in and issued a stay on a Supreme Court ruling that we had to go out, and the State Board of Elections had to go out and notify almost 1,600 voters that their ballots were going to be thrown out of the last election cycle if they did not have, or they did not cure their ballot in a 30-day time frame. And so the stay on that right now is exactly what Justice Riggs wanted when she appealed for it, because we know that any voter that's having to go out and cure their ballot is unconstitutional, and that has been our stance in this fight the entire time that we have been through both state and federal court, that no voter should have to go back and retroactively fix their ballot in any regard because they did nothing wrong when they registered to vote in the first place, and that Jefferson Griffin is unconstitutionally challenging voters from certain Democratic counties in the state, and he's challenging military voters in particular and overseas voters who should not and did not have to be able to show an ID when they sent back their absentee ballots if they were fighting for our country when they did so. And I'll be honest, that court ruling came out and I sort of was like, okay, thank you, and I'm happy about it, but I also know that it is going to, we will still maybe have to do this process, and that is what we're still preparing for at every regard, is to be able to, and that's why we're getting 3,000 people on a Zoom call tonight to talk about how they can take a phone bank or a door knocking shift and assigning people to voters if we have to, but we should not be in this situation to begin with.
I understand. Let me ask you this. Given that you have more time, why not try to cure those ballots? So if the court comes back and says you have to cure those ballots, you're ahead of the curve instead of stuck within a 30-day time frame. Because
the courts have not indicated what a cure process looks like. The State Board of Elections has, but also up until this last week, Senate Bill 382 was enacted until we saw a Wake County Superior Court judge come down with a stay on that as well, which was going to give the power of our state auditor, who is a Republican, control over our State Board of Elections and switch power over the body that was going to have to enact the cure process. And so I'll be honest, my big fear was, we give a switch up in the State Board of Elections and they come down with a completely different cure process than what the State Board of Elections beforehand under a governor's control came up with. And we can't tell voters the wrong thing. We have to be able to give them concrete advice about how to fix your ballot, because what Republicans are doing right now is already sowing seeds of doubt in an election process, and that's exactly what they want. And the last thing that I want to do as a Democratic Party chair is go out there and help them be able to do that. I want to be able to say, no, this is the last resort option that we should be forced to do, but we are going to make sure we've got the volunteer capacity to be able to make it happen in that 30-day window if that's what we get down to. Okay. And we also, to be honest with you, the crazier other thing about this is that we don't know how many voters we're actually going to have to cure. That's what's also caught up in the courts right now. Jefferson Griffin, a sitting judge who, by all sorts of definitions, if you do not apply the law and you do not file by the deadline that you are supposed to, these sorts of election procedures, has taken liberties with his own power as a judge and said, no, I should be granted special privileges, and you should, for everyone's knowledge on this, he challenged 5 Democratic counties in the state of North Carolina for military and overseas voters, heavily Democratic counties. He filed 5 of those complaints. One of them was actually made by the timeline at which you were expected to do that under state law. The others were not. Guilford County is the only one. So we know the State Board of Elections released the list of the Guilford County voters that Jefferson Griffin is challenging, because the State Board of Elections is following the law and said, you didn't submit these other claims in time, and if the courts are going to make us enact this cure process, it should only be for this county's subsection of voters. Jefferson Griffin is taking it through the courts again to try to apply to all of those 5 counties. But we do not actually know who the rest of those voters are, because Jefferson Griffin have not given us those names of who exactly he's challenging in those counties for these voters. Again, if you're sitting here listening to me thinking, what in the fuck is going on? I'm like, I'm with you. The whole state of North Carolina is with you right now, because the shit is insane.
Yeah,
the man is insane.
Anybody who looks at it has to say this is really absurd what's going on. I mean, what, Travis?
What kind of money is that tying up for the party, Anderson? Like, what? You don't have to give a number necessarily, but I mean, it's got to be a resource drain.
No, it is. I mean, but Justice Riggs has done an incredible job at making sure that we had the best legal strategy possible. And between her and the state party, it is going to be about a $3 million lawsuit that we have had post-election to be able to defend this win. And I look at people right now and I'm like, we want working people to run for office. State parties do not usually have this sort of an ability to be able to support candidates like that afterwards. You know, we don't hold a ton of money after presidential election cycles. And what North Carolina, I think, is doing right now is writing the playbook for how do you defend against these types of election denial claims, because we're going to see that in 2026. And so I'm trying to make sure all my state party chairs know, look, like, we got to have legal money after this is over with. And you've got to make sure that you've got a war chest of being able to go and litigate away the aspect that Republicans are trying to steal elections in courts now that are friendly to them in states like North Carolina. Like, you may not see that in a bluer state, right? But you are going to see it in redder states. And as we see reapportionment happen and we see the 2030 census come into play, I mean, they're going to use this throughout the next several election cycles in states where they want to hold power as long as humanly possible.
This whole process has really made Republicans out to be liars, because they have told us over and over that all these restrictions are all about election integrity. There is no aspect of election integrity to what he's doing right now.
No, because if there were, Thomas Mills, he would have filed these claims before the election happened. If you really thought the State Board of Elections was doing something wrong or the voter rolls were fucked up, why wait till afterwards?
Our election integrity would apply to everybody, not just people in Democratic counties. I mean, they've given the whole game away. They're not interested in fair elections. They're interested in winning elections and nothing else. You know, I feel like ever since they took control of the legislature in 2011 in North Carolina, they've been trying to make voting more difficult and trying to skew the rules in such a way that they can win elections. And now they've gotten so far that they're trying to change the rules literally after the fact. You know, there's no way you can play a game if the rules can get changed after the fact. You know, what if in baseball at the end of the game they go, well, you could only touch home base in the 3rd, 5th, and 8th innings. Otherwise, it doesn't count. You can't do that. You can't just change the rules after the game's over.
That actually sounds complicated enough to be part of baseball.
Exactly. Well, you know, I do want to get back a little bit to the economy, because I think Travis was really touching on some things that I think are going to shape what's happening as we head towards 2026, because I'm one of those people that believes that voters are generally self-interested, and they vote based on their own personal situation. And usually, if things are going pretty well, if the economy's growing, people have jobs, wages are increasing a little bit, people are going to vote for the status quo. But when things get rough, they throw the party in power out. And I think the biggest single factor of 2024 was the inflation, that people feel like the economy was horrible, when in reality it wasn't that bad. The other thing I think is that there's a lag between when people feel the pain and when it's really over. So the economy may be chugging along for 6 months. But if it was horrible 4 or 5 months before the election, they're going to vote based on the pain they felt 4 or 5 months ago, not necessarily their situation right then. And I think right now, I feel like we're headed towards a major amount of pain. And I think it has to do with these tariffs. And everything I've been reading is that while I think some small businesses are already feeling a little bit of the pain, I saw where Huntsville Mazda plant announced yesterday that its Huntsville, Alabama, is closing down or shutting down production on, I think, May 12th because they can't get the parts they need. They haven't been able to figure out the pricing yet, so they're going to stop. That's layoffs. The last of the containers coming from China are going to arrive sometime between the middle of May and the beginning of June, and after that, China's not shipping anything. So we're going to start to see shelves get bare. We're going to see prices start to go up. Businesses aren't going to be able to get what they need, whether it's shops, small shops, or manufacturing facilities. You're going to see layoffs. I think the first place they're saying you'll see it is the trucking industry is going to come to a screeching halt because nothing's going to be moving across the country. Dock workers are going to get laid off. Warehouses are going to be empty. But we haven't felt it yet. So right now we're kind of coasting along, and people are kind of saying, well, I see these focus groups where these people who voted for Trump in 2024 but voted for Biden in 2020 are saying, yeah, we still want to see what he's doing. We still believe, he's telling us these things are going to be okay. We're willing to suffer a little bit of pain to get things back in order. But I don't think we're going to suffer a little bit of pain. I think we're going to get hit hard. What do you guys
I think we were pretty close to a global depression a couple of weeks ago. If you look at what treasuries were doing, this was when Trump pulled back on some of the tariffs, within hours. I mean, it was clearly a quickly moving situation because people were really, really, really worried. But yeah, it seems extremely likely we're going to finally have that recession that we've been trying to talk ourselves into for about the last 5 years. Well, I guess not last 5 years, but since we came out of the pandemic, just seems like we're going to do it because we've decided, the president has decided we will.
Right. To me, that's where you start to see people shift. I keep hearing reading people saying, well, Democrats have to stand for something. I hate to be cynical, but no, they don't. They have to be not the party in power. And I think the party has some reckoning to do, and I think it's got to...
We do have to stand for something, Thomas Mills, and we do. I think it's and to be honest, Jeff Jackson, my good old AG, I think said it best about a week and a half ago when I was listening to him talk, and he said, Democrats have a message, we just do not have the ways to get a message out there like Republicans do right now. We do not have a Fox News. Like, we do not have the talk radios. We do not have the media strategy right now at this moment in time. I think that we need to accomplish everything that we want to and that we want to address for folks. And he said it. He was like, I can talk about Trump and it gets all the airtime in the world. He said, now I mentioned the text scams that are coming in on your phone from the toll roads, and he said, I get nothing about that right now. And so I think, like, it is trying to figure out how do you get coverage on things that, like, Democrats are doing well while also, like, understanding that Republicans are trying to destroy economies and communities across our state at the same time. And the juxtaposition in that is, I think, real. And we see it with the budget right now going on in the state in North Carolina. You see it at a smaller scale, I think, and everything that's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, North Carolinians should be used to in one way or the other. Like, we have seen the state cuts to our state budget, to our state employees over the last decade in North Carolina in terms of, like, when you're not having raises effectively. And I think the point that was made last night at the town hall by Chris Murphy is, like, a minimum wage should be a living wage regardless of where you are right now. And I think that point is true, and we're not seeing it, right? And Democrats can be active about pushing out what do we believe while also being and saying, and this is what the opposition is offering to you right now, and this is what you're seeing from that. Because it's not an inspiring message to our base of our party if we're like, we just need you to hate the other guy.
I agree. I agree. We need
A
to stand for
29%
something.
approval rating's got to come up for me, buddy. I mean it. Like, I gotta.
But I think at the end of the day, the voters are going to come in and they're going to vote based on how they're feeling. And if they're
Yeah.
feeling pretty lousy, they're going to throw the bums out. And particularly in midterm elections, which is why you see these big waves. It's a low turnout election. Almost every wave election we've had have been voters coming to vote against something. And the biggest midterm election waves, I've lived through a few of them. The first one was 94. And, we had a 42% turnout in North Carolina. And the Democrats just stayed home. And people got washed into office that people had never heard of. They didn't even know who their member of Congress was. They were like, Fred Heineman, who was that? He was a police chief in Raleigh and beat David Price. And, and then the next big one, I think, was probably 2006 when Democrats took over. The Iraq War had gone south. Katrina had happened. There were a bunch of scandals, Abramoff scandal, a bunch of stuff. And Democrats won. They weren't supposed to take back the Senate, and they ended up winning the Senate because the wave just washed people into power. And then we went into, 2010 was the backlash to Obama, and I think that had as much to do with people thinking that we could fix the global meltdown in a very short amount of time, and we couldn't, and it wasn't going to get fixed in 2 years, so they blamed Obama.
But
when
to
it was
your
really Bush's
point,
fault.
in that though, and I think that people would blame last election cycle, sure, on the economy, but it was also Democrats not showing up to the polls. Like, it was us not inspiring our own people,
Right. And
I
agree
think
with
that there is, like, you can say that, like, the economy, you can say a lot of other issues factored into that, but I'm like, at the end of the day, people did not feel inspired enough by our party, and unfortunately, like, by the operation that we had. And I think, to y'all's point, it has to do with, like, how their pocketbooks were feeling at that point in time. Like, in a lot of ways, I think Biden's economy worked for people that made six figures and above, and that had a 401k, and that had stocks in the stock market. And I'm like, that was not most of your average people in the United States right now. Like, it's not most young people I know. And I think that where we pull people into our party, at least young people for me, was values. And it was like, what is the future of this country that we are trying to offer to you at the end of the day? And I don't think we did a good enough job painting that image and that vision for people, that hope for people, in so many ways. I could be so wrong on that too. It's just,
I think you're right about 2024. I think Democrats did a very poor job of doing that. But one of the things that depressed me about the election is I believe the economy was strong. I mean, inflation had been hurting, but wages were going up. We were growing at a rate, and it gets back to that kind of delayed. I think it was probably stronger on election day than it had been 6 months before. And all that I thought Trump was going to inherit this great economy and take it for a ride, he drove it off the cliff.
Because that's what Republicans do when Democrats hand them good economies. And that's the thing, I agree with you. I just, to y'all's point, like, it wasn't felt at the bottom of that enough yet. And that's where I look at, like, the broadband policy, and to Travis's point, even, like, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, like, all of these things were going to take a little bit more time for people to really feel them. And the communication around that, for me, was just not there. Like, we weren't saying, you're going to have high-speed internet, and because it doesn't sound good, right, by the end of this decade. But, like...
Right.
That is real, and I think people just feel like we lied to them in some regard, and that we weren't framing that appropriately. I don't know.
I think that assumes people were paying more attention than they were.
That's real.
And I consistently get frustrated because a lot of the criticism of the Democratic Party needing to communicate better, needing to say this, needing to do that, is very similar to me to people complain about the media. And they say, oh, well, they're not reporting this, they're not reporting that. Why aren't you guys all over Trump? And I say, when I was in the meeting, I say, well, how did you find out about it? Do you talk to Donald Trump every day? Like, are you guys buddies? Is that where you're getting your information about? No, I read it in the newspaper, and I think, well, Seems like it's working fine for you. I don't know why you think it's not working fine in general if it's working fine for you. So I mean, all this information is out there. I mean, people can go and look into what the Democratic Party has to offer. I do think the Democratic Party in particular in 2024 failed to shrink down what it was to enough easy to understand good things. And I think that left room to be defined by some social issues that just most people weren't into. The Republicans were able to define who you were, and they did it in a way that hurt the Democratic Party with a large block of voters. And there you go.
Well, I agree. I think we need to revamp a lot of our communications infrastructure, and I don't know that it needs to always come through the party. My friend Will Robinson is writing a series of posts right now about Will's a media strategist out of Washington, about decentralizing the communication, and really that's what Republicans have it on so many different channels. It's not all trying to come through the party, or it's not trying to come through a super PAC or something. It's on talk radio. It's on, it's digital stuff on blogs. It's small newspapers. It's just across the board, and we've not really done that. I mean, kind of to Anderson's point a little bit, the CHIPS Act. It is hard to say it's a long time, but I was so mad in 2022 because I felt like Democrats had a very successful summer. The CHIPS Act, they got gun control passed, they got the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, and then they got, as you said, the ill-named Inflation Reduction Act passed. But the first of those were all done but with bipartisan support. And nobody had a legislative year like that in the last 20 years. No president has had that, where they passed that many significant pieces of legislation. And Democrats never really took a victory lap. They'd check one off and they'd go to the other, and they were thinking everybody's going to see what we've done, and they didn't. We needed to be out there telling them about it. We needed to be telling them in small town newspapers. We needed to be saying, we're doing this, and give them a reason why. It wasn't just that we passed the CHIPS Act. We're going to bring manufacturing back. We're going to protect your kids in schools by trying to make guns a little bit more difficult for people who don't need to have them. We don't do a good job of that. And anyhow, I've probably talked too much today, but I appreciate you guys being here, and we'll do this again, and in a couple of weeks. And I appreciate everybody listening. I'm Thomas Mills for Politics NC. Thank you, Anderson. Thank you, Travis. Talk to you soon.